Hi, Peter Jones, author, property investor and ex-chartered surveyor, and in this video I want to start thinking about valuation and how we can come up with some kind of assessment of value for ourselves. Now, there's a number of things which I need to say about this, and I've been thinking about this long and hard since I did my last video, which you might want to watch, which is almost like an introduction to this video. And I think there's some basic principles which I probably need to explain first before we get into the nitty-gritty of how to come up with a figure. And I know that if you're a little bit sort of details minded, you may find that a little bit frustrating, because it'd just be really nice to know, well, you do this, you do this on Rightmove, and then you'll come up with a figure. But unfortunately, valuation isn't precise like that. Valuation, you often hear it said, is an art and not a science. And that is kind of true. I mean, there is some science which we can use to actually come up with our idea of what the value is. But the interpretation of that science is an art, so it's a bit of both. So it's not a binary thing. It's not like there's a right or wrong answer. It's not like there is one figure which we're aiming for. It's not like a yes or no answer. And in fact, the reality of valuation is that value is a range. A range of what? Well, it's a range of opinions. And what you're trying to judge is what the market thinks the property is worth. And of course, the market is made up of a finite number of individuals, but I mean, I say finite, but in the UK property market, for example, as a whole, at any one time, there could be, 100,000, 200,000 people looking to buy a property, all of whom have an opinion on value. And all of those opinions really are taken into account by the market mechanism to come up with a figure of what the likely value is of any property that you're looking at. Even if you wanted to break that down to a local level where there may only be 500 people looking in your local town, but all of that opinion feeds into what is the value of the property. So it's not a simple thing. It isn't just a question of sort of jumping onto Rightmove or Zoopla and coming up with some kind of algorithm which gives you a precise figure. That's never going to happen. And this is why it's so frustrating when we have like a mortgage valuation and we know what the property is worth because we've done the research, we know what a refurb's going to add to the value, and then a valuer turns up and they downvalue it by 10% or even more. And we say, well, the valuer is wrong. But the reality is that the valuer isn't wrong, they're just aiming for a different point of the range. Anyway, I'm probably getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let me get back into some more fundamentals and principles. And by the way, I should say that what I will do is in the next video, we will jump onto the computer and I'll show you how I would try and work out roughly what a property is worth. Now, next thing, I don't want to make this sound like I know it all and I'm being a bit arrogant about this, but I am an ex-chartered surveyor. I've done many property valuations ranging from residential mortgages when I was in my 20s to commercial valuations when I was in my 30s, ranging from sort of like £20,000 for a house back in the 1980s up to millions, multiple millions, 100 million I think was the biggest valuation I did when I was working in London in the 1990s. So I've kind of done it all. And one thing which I realise is that experience counts for a lot. So again, I know that because people have asked me to do a video on valuation, that they've sort of kind of said, just show us a quick and easy way to get to the right figure. It doesn't really work like that. I spent 3 years at university and then 2 years practical experience just to be able to get my letters to be a chartered surveyor. But it was only once I got my letters that really I was allowed out to start doing valuations, and then I was only allowed to do simple ones for the first year or two. It takes experience. Now, I'm not saying that you can't come up with your own opinion of value, and of course, if you're watching this and you want to invest in property, then you need to. But what I'm saying is watching a video like this isn't going to make you an expert. And just as I would say, I can't give financial advice, I'd also have to say, don't rely upon your own assessment of value. It will give you a guide. But at some point you may want to check in with somebody who is a professional. Now, they may or may not agree with your figure. It doesn't always follow that a valuer is going to downvalue a property. Sometimes they come up with what we consider to be the right figure. I'm using a lot of air quotes here, aren't I? Sorry about that. Another thing to think about, you'll often hear it said, but surely value is just what somebody is prepared to pay for a property. And 95% of the time, perhaps even 97.5% of the time, that works for us. But technically speaking, it's not actually true. And if you go and look at the RICS, the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors Red Book, in which they actually give a definition of what open market value is, one of the things which they will say is that it's not actually what somebody's prepared to pay for a property, because there's a lot of qualifications around that, because there's a lot of reasons why somebody may be prepared to pay a particular sum of money which actually doesn't reflect the true market value. But for us, as I say, 95% of the time that probably works, and we can use that as a guide to what value might be. So last point on this. I have, as I say, had emails with people saying, please can you show us how to do a valuation. But again, it's not as simple as that, because the value of the property is going to be affected by the strategy that you're going to be adopting. For example, we could have a house. It could be like a simple terraced house. Are we valuing it for an owner-occupier to move into? Are we valuing it as a buy-to-let? Well, in which case the two figures are probably going to be identical, if not similar, probably identical. But what if we're actually going to turn it into a HMO? That could give us a different indication of value. So we need to think about what strategy that can change it. And for different strategies, there's different methodologies. For most of us, if we're dealing with sort of like simple buy-to-lets, we're probably going to use what they call the direct comparison method of valuation, which is where you'll literally look for a property which is as identical as you can find out what that's sold for recently, and then you can use that price for which it's just been sold as a guide to the price or value of the property that you're looking at. Now, that's the very sort of simple version of that. We will come back to that in the next video about how perhaps if we find properties which are similar but not identical, how do we cope with the things which actually aren't identical, because every property is probably going to be a little bit different. So that's one methodology. But if you're going to value the same house as a potential HMO, the methodology is going to be very, very different. You're going to be looking at it on what's basically a profits method of valuation, where you don't just value the bricks and mortar, a house as a house, you'd be valuing it almost as a little business with the income flow. If you're going to do development, whether that be sort of house development or commercial conversions, there's a different methodology again, where you'll be valuing the property, taking into account what it's going to be worth after the development, and taking into account all the costs of getting to that point of development, and also taking into account the realistic profit which developers in the market would want to make from that property. So there's three different bases of valuations. There's actually more than that, but probably in our sort of property lifetimes, those are the three main ones we're going to come across if we get into buy-to-lets, HMOs, and some kind of development work. So it's not like there is one methodology and there's just one figure. And this is the thing which I really want to stress. And to know how to get to the right figure is where experience comes in, and it can take a lot of experience. Now, does that mean you can't come up with a figure? No, not at all. There are tools and methodologies that we can adapt and adopt, but all I'm saying is you just need to be a little bit cautious, because a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. Most times we're going to be okay. If you're buying a simple buy-to-let, if you're buying a terraced house in a street where there's hundreds of identical houses, or in an area where there's thousands of identical houses, it should be easy enough to be able to get a figure. But this is why it gets very difficult when you start trying to value a one-off property, which is unique. Maybe unique in terms of its location, maybe in terms of its construction. It's just unique. Maybe it's out in the middle of the countryside and there are no directly comparable properties. That gets hard, and we just need to be aware of this. So in summary, valuation is actually a whole range of figures, and we have to be able to sift through the likely range or the likely range of opinions of the market to come up with a figure which we think most of the market would agree with is right. But if we actually stray out away from that figure, it doesn't necessarily make us wrong. And if a valuer comes along and values the property at a figure within that range which isn't where we've decided where we want to be on the range, that doesn't necessarily make them wrong either. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about the methodology for actually coming up with a figure, subject to the caveat, as I've just said, that we need to be a little bit careful, because watching this video isn't going to make you a qualified valuer. But if you're in investment property, if you're buying buy-to-lets, you want to know how to come up with a reasonable assessment of what the property is going to be worth when you buy it, and what the property is going to be worth when you've refurbed it, and we will think about that. I hope you found this video useful and informative, and if you did, then please come over to my website www.thepropertyteacher.co.uk, where you'll find loads more great property related resources, including free special reports to download and my best-selling series of ebooks, which includes the Successful Property Renovators Workshop, 63 common defects in investment property and how to spot them. And if you're just starting out in property, or if you want to grow your portfolio, you may be particularly interested in the Successful Property Investors Strategy Workshop, in which I'll take you through exactly how I started and built my property portfolio, starting literally with none of my own money, and how I built a portfolio of £2 million worth of property in just 4 years. And that was starting from scratch. I'll take you through everything that I did right so that you can copy me and do the same. And I'll also show you everything that I did wrong so that you can avoid the mistakes that I made, and so that you can progress in property and be far more successful far more quickly than I ever was. And this is based upon my own real life experience, and it took me about 4 years to actually work out how to do property investing properly. But in the 200 pages in the Successful Property Investors Strategy Workshop, I'm going to show you all of that 4 years knowledge condensed down so that you can use it immediately. And until next time, here's to successful property investing.